Hi, welcome to today's program. In this lesson, I'm going to show you why it's completely acceptable to open your racket face on the one-handed backhand. And even if your setup is not perfect, if you apply the principles that I'm going to suggest, you will still be able to produce a powerful and consistent shot. Let's begin. One of the most common coaching tips is not to lay the racket face open on the one-handed backhand. Even I myself have emphasized it on this channel, but I'm going to actually show you how this may be the least of your worries. If you watch pro tennis, all of the players with a one-handed backhand, Roger Federer, Wawrinka, and Gasquet, you can find many examples of them laying the racket face open before starting the stroke. Now, this usually happens on the high balls and when they're stressed for time, but it's the other parts of the swing which really make a big difference. And whether or not you keep the racket pointing up to the sky or you lay it over your non-hitting shoulder, as long as you do the important things later in the swing, you will be okay. And there's some players who open the racket face every time on the one-handed backhand. Now, the most important part of the swing is where the racket falls to in what we call the slot position. To show you what I'm talking about, I now need to switch the camera angle so you can see behind my back. So, the problem with the one-handed backhand is not what happens up here, it's what happens when the racket free falls into the slot. Ideally, while we're sideways, we want the racket to be parallel with the back fence, or in this case, the baseline. And the issue with driving your racket face forwards and not having it closed is that it will be open at contact points. So if your racket is still laid open when it's time to swing, that's a no-no. And that's why we usually emphasize getting the racket face closed as early as possible. But if you're not able to do that, and there will be many circumstances where it's just not going to happen, you're going to have to make sure that when the racket falls into the slot, it's not open. This is really the only part that matters, and it doesn't really matter how you get from point A to point B, so long as you get this position, okay? Now there is no wiggle room. It has to get like this, and you will not find any players making it work with their racket face open from here. Because if my racket face is open from here, in order to close the strings, I now have to roll my wrist in order to put the racket in the position that it should have gotten into in the first place. Now, another thing that is very important is that the racket head does not fall below your hand. You need to keep it above, and you actually need to have a fixed angle in your wrist. I recommend fixing your wrist as early as possible in the letter L for leverage position, and this needs to be maintained through contact point and all the way to the follow through. And getting this as early as you can is essential to success, so you can do less thinking and hit more free and get comfortable on the court. It feels a little bit weird at first, but you have to get uncomfortable to get comfortable, and I promise if you can keep your racket head above your hand the entire time, you will get a lot more leverage on your one-handed backhand, except a lot of people are doing this. Instead of dropping their body down like an elevator and having the racket head stay above the hand, instead of free falling, they're using their racket and their wrist to get under the ball, and you'll see them often have the racket in this position, and then they'll try and brush and fan up, because a lot of people have a common misconception that the one-handed backhand is a wrist roll. Except flicking your wrist, like Gangnam style, is probably the worst thing that you can do for your one-handed backhand. It leads to failure, loss of power, inconsistency, and ultimately massive frustration. This is the only way to get leverage over your one-handed backhand. So from here, we drop our body down like an elevator, and we get down to the height of the ball with our body. Now, when you swing to contact point, you want to keep the wrist up and fixed. Okay, it may not look like my racket head is, above the hand, but it is. Okay, and I'm not moving my wrist at all as I'm contacting through the ball. It stays fixed, it stays fixed. I go out and away from my body, I stay sideways. And if you notice the position that I finish in, the wrist is still stable, letter L for leverage. And if you watch any of the good players who hit a one-handed backhand, they have this common thread as well. I hope you liked what you learned here. I recommend taking the next step and going into my online course because it takes these principles and combines it into a system for your success. And you can quickly apply it to your game no matter what your level. In any event, thank you for tuning in and use what you've learned to modernize your game. Tennis Doctor is a self-help tennis book for adults. You could have 40-inch biceps, rapid anticipation, fancy feet, and a brilliant mind, but if you have poor swing mechanics, you will never win. On the contrary, you could have slow reactions, terrible footwork, and be 40 pounds overweight, yet still produce a good shot if you can perfect your swing. By reading Tennis Doctor, you own the secret to a perfect swing, and if we have to, we'll call you an Uber to get to the ball in time. Read it now on Amazon and Audible, and if you are a disciple of my tennis philosophy, you can also read the Tennis Bible. Both of these books are available on Amazon in every country.